Dear learners, Namaskar. I am Dr. Amiteshwar Ratra, Associate Professor at Stride, IGNOU, and now we will discuss social learning theory in this video session. This is part of your MDE 412. In this session, we will focus on Bandura's social learning theory and application of behaviorism in instructional design. Social learning theorists believed in the use of controlled laboratory experiments to find out about learning, as you would have heard about experiments conducted by Pavlov and Skinner in earlier video sessions. Social learning theory builds upon operant conditioning principles, but the concerns themselves primarily with the ways in which people acquire behavior appropriate to their social context and to their immediate circumstances. One of the main social theorists is Albert Bandura, who expanded behavioral principles while acknowledging the importance of cognitive development that takes place in the processes such as thinking, memory, and problem solving. Bandura stresses the role of internal cognitive structures, which are thoughts or memories of the brain which allow people to learn through observation or imitation of others. Bandura and others believe that the major incentive for learning is identification with other people. It is called social learning because it concerns itself mostly with the ways in which people acquire behavior appropriate to their social context and to their immediate circumstances. Learning occurs through observing others and copying other people's behavior. Social learning is also sometimes referred to as observational learning theory. It is also imitation of others, as you would have noticed that a young child is smiled upon and in response the child also smiles. These are all social learned behaviors that one acquires with the help of memory processes that takes place, cognitive processes that are used for acquiring social learning. Three principles that are applied to social learning theory are: 1. Much human learning is a function of observing the behavior of others. We also learn to imitate by receiving reinforcement for performing certain behavior and maintain this imitative behavior through continued reinforcements. So, imitation or observational learning can be explained in terms of operant conditioning principles, provided it is correct to say that people can imagine both the reinforcement and the behavior of models. Bandura distinguishes between acquisition of knowledge, that we may say learning, observable performance based on that knowledge, that is what is behavior. Bandura suggests that we all may know more than we show. This is like students may have learned how to add simple fractions, but at times perform very badly at tests. This could have happened with any one of us also. This could have been because of being anxious, being sick, or we might have just misread the question, not paid enough attention to the question asked. So the Bandura notes that there are 4 important elements or processes associated with observational learning, and these are the desired behavior, attention, retaining information or impressions, that we say retention, producing the behaviors, that is the motor reproduction, and wanting to repeat these behaviors, that is becomes our intrinsic motivation. So I just again emphasize over here that you have to know that the behaviors that are learned through imitation or observational learning are the behaviors on which we are paying attention with the desired behavior that we want to learn. Then we have to retain that information or processes or impressions in our mind. So that is the retention of the desired behavior. And then we are expected to produce the behavior, that is the motor reproduction of the behavior has to take place. So when we also want to repeat these behaviors, these are the intrinsic motivation. So it is from inside the motivation will come that I want to repeat these behaviors. So the emphasis that has been over here is on attention, retention, motor reproduction, intrinsic motivation. And further we will study more on this on reinforcement also. So now we will further now discuss the salient concepts that are important for any social learning to take place. One, attention. Now, as we just now said, that now what I am speaking is also creating a sound for you, a volume for you. And if we are looking at other things in the television also, what attracts attention? A sound, a volume, a pitch, that might have a commercial ends also. So these things generally, when you will see the commercial breaks, they are made in a way that attracts attention. So it is attention seeking behavior has to be there. So something has to attract our attention, which is going to have an effect on our observational or social learning. Now we will see if the illustration and the graphic presented in the instructional material that we are presenting in our self-learning material is interesting and novel. We are likely to turn our attention to learning. Whether the material is, even at times the material may not be having some illustrations or graphics. If it is written in a manner that our attention is sought towards what has been written, the text attracts our attention. So this also leads to our social learning. Then we come to the next important feature about social learning would be retention. The ability to store information is an important part of the learning process. Retention of the newly learned behavior is essential for social learning. You store both verbal, written representations in a step-by-step instructions or labels that describe the actions to be performed. You would notice that we retain some memories. So we also retain how to walk somewhere. We retain how to talk with somebody. These are our verbal and written impressions that take place into our learning behavior when we are interacting also with others. So we are also expecting that we pay attention and retain the newly learned behaviors, because every time our behavior has to keep on improving and we have to acquire skills that will help us to further strengthen our social learning in the given environment. So next comes the important feature is to reproduce. In this step, you actively perform the behavior that has been observed. However, attention paid, the observation and retaining the information has an impact on procreating, imitating, and duplication of information by a learner. So this is an important feature for further use of this information by the learner later on. Then comes the important feature of intrinsic motivation, which is directly linked to reinforcement. Though we may acquire a skill or a behavior through observation, we may not perform that behavior until there is some motivation to do so. We may anticipate being reinforced for imitating the actions of a model. We may be motivated to pay attention and remember, reproduce the behaviors. So we have the intrinsic motivation has to come from within. It has to come from within, that we have to reproduce that behavior that we have observed. If you read a instructional design method and learn how to do program evaluation study. When you learn to do program evaluation study, you have to have that motivation to actually implement it in the given real life modeling when you have to do program evaluation of a certain program of study or course of study. So there has to be motivation and motivation comes from reinforcement. So reinforcement is a significant component in learning. But in social learning theories, the value and role of reinforcement is expanded to include the social aspects of the environment. For example, social learning theory allows psychologists to explain why learners learn different skills in different countries or cultures. As you are aware that India is a multicultural country, learning styles may be different for a child in a given family also. So the learners may have acquired some socialing from different countries, from different cultures, or through even their own family environment. So social learning theories also include reinforcement as direct reinforcement, vicarious reinforcement, and self-reinforcement. Reinforcement is an important component for any behavior to be shown or being faded off. So when we are talking of direct reinforcement, it occurs during the process of modeling. For example, after you receive a good grade from your tutor, you receive praises from your counselor or peers or family or parents. When we receive praises, that leads to direct reinforcement. That leads to reoccurrence of that behavior again and again. If we are not getting good marks and then we are scolded, that would also have a direct negative reinforcement and lead to the improvement by the student. So receiving good grades or receiving being topper in the class or getting some medals. So these are certain behaviors that leads to a lot of reinforcement by your peer group, by your families, by your parents, even by your academic counselor, by the study center coordinators, and all this would lead to a positive modeling effect. Now next comes the vicarious reinforcement. At certain times when we see others being rewarded or punished for a particular action, and then we modify our behavior as if we had received the consequences ourselves. So these are certain things that we might be observing in our own milieu. If one of my peer group has been scolded, say for coming late, then and has been asked to stay out of the classroom, so probably the other person who has also come late would stay out by itself, following that the punishment has also been received by self, and avoiding the behavior of going inside the classroom, being late. So this is like we are learning by seeing whether certain activity would lead us to punishment or rewards when others are in the same situation, and then we are modifying our behaviors. If the teacher sees that the student has written the assignment in their own words and she praises another student for doing so, and when the student is being praised for doing so, then it will motivate the other students also to write the assignments in their own words rather than copying from the study material. So this is also a vicarious reinforcement when the academic counselor is rewarding the student for doing certain activity that is good. Next type of reinforcement is the self-reinforcement. Self-reinforcement is one of the most important academic reinforcers, as you all are adult learners and you all have commitments towards various purposes in your life. You have multitasking, you have multi-roles, and all this would definitely have, impact upon your study time available with you, impact upon the money that you can spend upon your studies, impact upon the time you can devote to do your studies actually. And all this can be done only if one is self-reinforced. The reinforcement has to come from within for completion of any course when a student is doing, especially from a distance education mode. So here the students are reinforced by their own personal goals, standards, or criteria they have set for themselves. They don't depend upon the reinforcement of others, because at times you may realize when this session is taking place, many of the students would be sitting at different ends in different parts of the country, in different parts of the world. But at the same time, all with their own self-reinforcement would go through this video, listen through the video, go through the MCQs expected by you to follow up, and this would all has to come from within. So for example, students may read and learn French literature because they enjoy reading, or because they have discovered that such reading is essential to earn a good grade, or they have discovered that doing this program of study or course of study would lead to a better job facilities. The reinforcement of learning French for them is because of their personal values and what they want in life. So now we come over to the applications of behaviorism in instructional design. Now, you have learned about behaviorist views on learning. In this section, we will examine the implications of behaviorist perspectives on learning for designing instruction. To use the principles of operant conditioning, a teacher has to plan, design instruction in precise steps. Now, what are these steps? Now, let us see what are these steps. One has to define the desired behavior, identify the successive steps that are required if the student is to reach the standard, immediately reinforce approximations to the desired behavior, communicate your ideas with your students, and at the same time, if the desired behavior is not being seen, then also you have to immediately inform your student and have the desired behavior be expressed. So the change of frequency of your reinforcement as the student's behavior changes, that is, either the behavior has to be seen or the behavior has to fade out. So depends upon the frequency of the teacher's reinforcement to the student's behavior. So we have also to provide rewards for achieving desired behavior. And as teachers and students and as adult learners, also the rewards that are acquired are when we are happily able to understand the course of material, we are able to acquire grades, we are able to acquire and accumulate the degree that we are working towards. Now, as you will see in the instructional design model that is given also in your course material and also is being shown on the slide, see, as illustrated, the principles of learning derived from behavioral theories can potentially affect instructional design decisions in many ways. One important implication is arranging schedules and types of reinforcements to optimally enhance learner motivation and achievement. Now you should note that although reinforcement sometimes consists of extrinsic rewards such as stars, grades, verbal praise or points credited towards grades, it often takes simple form of feedback about the correctness of the response. If the student can go, then we will go towards the process. If the student cannot go, then we have to redesign our task materials. If the student can understand what the learning task is, then we go towards the process and have students already achieve the objectives. Now, if the students have already achieved the objectives, then we have to state the remedial objectives so that the learning can take place. And if the student have been already able to achieve the objectives, then we will immediately go to our next objective. And if the student has not been able to go to the towards the learning objective, then we will make instructions by increasing learning behaviors and decreasing interfering behaviors, so that the student is able to observe and evaluate. And then we have to find out, can students achieve the objectives? If the student has been able to achieve the objectives, then we will repeat the process with the next objective. But if the student again has not been able to achieve the learning behavior desired that was by the teacher, then we will again go back and instruct by increasing learning behaviors and decreasing the interfering behaviors till the time that the students are able to achieve the desired objectives. And thereafter we will proceed towards repeat the process with the next objectives. So this is how that the learning tasks are designed for instructional objectives. So the second broad implication of behavioral theory now is the need for designers to perform a task analysis before developing instructional materials. A task analysis defines the content needed to address the key instructional problem, thereby guiding the identification of objectives and development of instructional strategies, lesson material, test items, and creating smaller steps and increasing opportunities for reinforcement. Now, the third broad implication of behaviorism for instructional design is to strongly support the usage of instructional objectives. Now, particularly the behavioral type proposed by Robert Major in 1984, such objectives clearly identify the overt responses reflecting mastery of the content, level of achievement indicating acceptable performance, and the conditions under which the evaluation takes place. Using such objectives, the instructor can assess objectively and reliably the degree of learning attained for each lesson goal. As instructor, we have to be clear about our objectives, rely upon the degree of learning that would take place, has to be clearly stated through our objectives. Now, the fourth broad implication of the behavioral theories have inspired of several influential and evidence-based instructional strategies, broader course designs, and these include classic approaches such as programmed instruction by Skinner, personalized system of instruction by Keller, mastery learning by Bloom, direct instruction by Engelman and Carnine. These models and their many derivatives incorporate task analysis, precise content objectives, highly sequenced instruction, active responding, and reinforcement linked directly to performance. So now we come over to how do we define or specify our behavioral objectives. Now, from a behaviorist perspective, the planning of instruction would start from an initial statement of the change of behavior. This change in behavior can take the form of attainment of new knowledge, acquisition of new skill, and a change of attitude. Now, there are three types of behavioral changes that are expected to be demonstrated from behavioral objectives. These are cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. In 1956, Benjamin Bloom and his colleagues began development of taxonomy in the cognitive, attitudinal, that is affective, and psychomotor domains. Later, Robert Major stated that the use of instructional objectives prompted interest in learners and educators. Gagne and Briggs also had backgrounds in military and industrial psychology, developed a set of instructions for writing objectives that was based on Major's work. And by late 1960s, most of the units or chapters written for open and distance learning were presented using behavioral objectives. Behavioral objectives state that successful learners should be able to demonstrate what they have learned. Each objective should have an outcome that can be easily measured and should state the conditions under which this behavior will be achieved. Now, there are 3 rules to follow when specifying an objective in behavioral terms. 1. The objective has to describe behavior that is observable and measurable or accessible. So whatever the behavior that we are expecting, desired behavior that we are expecting, needs to be observed, needs to be measured or assessed. So the second would be the objective has to describe the desired direction of the changes in behavior. So the direction, whether we want whether we are reinforcing the desired behavior by increasing, the behavior has to increase, or whether the behavior has to decrease or fade off, the direction of the change has to be specified. The next would be the objective should describe the behavior in the context of the content that has to be measured. So the behavior that for every social learning, the desired behavior is context specific. It is culturally specific. What the social context of that area, of that country, of that society, or that educational system. So it has to be specified and desirably measured in the similar way, which would be same for all the places that the similar instruction has been given. So the programmed instruction that was started by B.F. Skinner, who proposed this, is a major educational practice based on operant conditioning. Programmed instruction is used as individualized instruction, which is developed keeping in view of individual learners and their learning pace. The specific features of this programmed instruction or programmed learning are: a logical sequence of information is presented, one small unit at a time, to the individual student. Then the student has to make an active response to each unit. The student gets immediate knowledge of whether his or her result is correct or not. Each student works at his or her own pace. Programmers aim to get the student to perform in a very specific way. Now, based on the operant conditioning, Skinner's teaching machine was developed, requiring the learner to complete or answer a question and then receive feedback on the correctness of the response. Now, programmed instruction is no longer based exclusively on operant conditioning, mainly because work with different programs has shown that instructional design principles are more important than the principles of reinforcement. It has been found that the factors basic to a good instructional package include the scope and sequence of the program, the presentation mode, the sequencing of the frames, the difficulty of the steps between the frames, the assumptions made about students' pre-existing knowledge, motivation, and capacity for independent work. So Gagney's work has also made significant contribution to scientific knowledge base in the field of instructional technology, particularly in the area of instructional design. Gagney identified several steps which were used to design instruction. These were: identify the types of learning outcomes. Each outcome may have prerequisite knowledge or skills that must be identified. Identify the internal conditions or processes the learner must have to achieve the outcomes. Identify the external conditions or instruction needed to achieve the outcomes. Specify the learning context. Record the characteristics of the learners. Select the media for instruction and plan to motivate the learners. The instruction is tested with learners in the form of a formative evaluation. After the instruction has been used, summative evaluation is used to judge the effectiveness of the instruction. First we use formative evaluation and then we use summative evaluation to judge the effectiveness of the instruction. With the advent of behavioristic approaches to instruction and the later developments in the field, individualized instruction took shape in the context of the open and distance learning system. Self-learning materials are prepared which are individual paced. The planning of designing instructions materials are preceded by behavioral objectives. Sequencing and organizing the instructions, etc. The behavioristic approach to learning and aimed at mastery learning, which includes continuous evaluation of competencies followed by remedial teaching, where the students had failed to master competencies. Educational technology and computer-assisted instructions are also based on the behavioristic approaches that involved drill and practice controlled by the program developer rather than the learner. So the self-instructional programs were designed that included pre-test and post-test and the self-directed assessments of students after completing the course. Now with this we come to an end of this video session. In this session, we learnt about Bandura's social learning theory, and we also further discussed the applications of behaviorism in instructional design. Now I, Dr. Amiteshwar Ratra, Associate Professor at Stride, IGNOU, says you goodbye, and we will meet you in another session for MDE 412. Namaskar.